Welcome and hello, everybody. I am Lama Dawa, and again, we're doing introductory Buddhist philosophy and practice. And we have on the Zoom with us a relative beginner student, Tal, who is going to will be interacting and doing some Q&A and see where that leads. So no particular agenda right now, but this is a continuation of the last couple of conversations that we've had. So Tal, why don't you start with your first question?
So based on the last week's four contemplations or the four thoughts, one thing that came to mind in terms of, I guess the question is, we're supposed to be grateful to have the opportunity to be a being that can consciously learn that you shouldn't waste this life, right? And I guess what the question is how do we know that this is a great fortune rather than some kind of great suffering? Meaning that in some ways, when I think about things, it could be like some kind of purgatory that we're in rather than some heaven or something to that effect.
Well, that's quite a question. I don't know that I've ever contemplated it quite like that. So I think first of all, let's not overthink things too much, although that's your prerogative as well. We're not, first of all, you started your question by saying we're supposed to consider blah, blah, blah. I want to just kind of start from the very beginning and say we're not supposed to do anything. That just sounds a little too guilt-ridden or too much like we have to do things. Nobody's forcing us to do anything. No one's twisting our arm. Dharma is a very voluntary process. It is a opportunity, and I would say it's a privilege. So let me explain that, because that kind of goes to your question, which is how do we know what our situation is? And you mentioned suffering and all these other things, purgatory and hell and so on. So it's a great question, actually. And it's the kind of question we should be asking ourselves, because the point of these opening four contemplations, and again, to repeat them for the benefit of people that didn't see the last video, perhaps, the first one is the fact that we do contemplate that we have this opportunity in this human form with a fully functioning nervous system to hear and then contemplate and then assimilate authentic teachings about the reality of our existence, of the world, how the mind works, et cetera, how our feelings and thoughts and emotions kind of color our perceptions and therefore our experience of the world. That's the first contemplation. And the fact that it's impermanent is the second contemplation, the fact that everything comes to an end, nothing lasts forever, and that things are in a constant state of change. So that's the second contemplation. I'm abbreviating, of course. The third contemplation is that when we look to external things in this world for sources of happiness, we get happiness, we get joy, we get pleasure, but they're not lasting. Nothing lasts. And those things that if we attach to them, if we want them too much, they may just turn around and be the cause of disappointment and frustration and suffering, because we can't hold on to them. And they will change into something other than what we thought they were that we wanted. So that's the third contemplation. If we really look deeply, we try to examine the things that seemingly give us joy and pleasure in this world. And then we look and see, what is the nature of that joy and pleasure? How deep really is it? And is it something we can count on? And then the fourth is the fact that everything has causes, and causes always have effects, and that there's this kind of principle or law that seems to operate throughout the universe, which is that everything, again, is cause and effect, that things are interrelated, interdependent, that nothing is just random in this universe or in this world or in our life. So we look deeply at that to try to really understand what are the implications of that understanding it really throws us back into a state of self-responsibility. It makes us responsible for our thoughts and our actions, because we start to understand that what we say and do and think do have very real consequences in our life, consequences that will lead to happiness or suffering of some sort. So those, very briefly, those are the four contemplations. So your question refers to the first of those, which was about how do we know what this human life really is when we really look at it? Is that fair assessment of your question?
Sure.
Okay. So again, we're not supposed to come to any conclusion. We arrive at a conclusion based on our own examination by looking as clearly and objectively and unprejudicedly as possible. And then we see for ourselves what is true. So in this tradition, which is Buddhism, the Buddha, who is, of course, the founder and the original enlightened being that saw truth as it is, not made up, not fabricated, but as it is, he himself said, don't take my word for anything. Out of respect for me, don't do that. Contemplate what I say. If you have respect, if you do feel that what I'm saying may be true, check it out for yourself. Examine it carefully. Apply logic, apply reason, find examples, mull it over. And when you have a decisive answer in your mind, a decisive sort of conclusion of the truth or not, then that's your truth. So what is this human life? Why do we say it's worth contemplating, that it's a precious opportunity? Which again is basically the heart of your question. Is it truly an opportunity, or is it kind of just a storyline? So we can start by comparing, okay, we know we're alive. We basically know this. We know we have this form. We know we perceive our world around us through our vision, through our hearing, through our sense of touch, through taste, through smell, through all of our senses. We relate, we get feedback, we get information about the world. And then we process this through this amazing thing called our brains and our nervous system. And we think, and then we can draw conclusions. We can communicate with other beings in our species, other human beings. We can do all these things. If we compare ourselves to other incarnated sentient beings, all the different animals that we know about, all the creatures that are alive, humans are a very, very small amount. So here we are, we're human beings. Just by the fact of numbers, we are a very, very small number of people, of beings, small slice of the pie. Well, we're humans. So maybe we think, well, what does it matter? I'm not an animal. I'm not an insect. I'm not a fish. I'm not a bird. I'm a human being. So what? But if we think about it, the causes of being born as a human being are virtuous actions. To get to sort of the top of the evolutionary heap, if you will, it's, again, we said earlier, if we contemplate, things don't just happen randomly. So our consciousness, to get to this state and to be incarnated into this physical form, is somewhat unusual, just by the odds. So we should realize, okay, this is sort of an unusual opportunity. And as we said, the other contemplations are that it's fleeting, it's impermanent. We could be snuffed out like a candle any moment. We could have a disease. We could get in a car wreck. It happens all the time, these things. Wars. The causes of death The causes of shortening of this life are huge. The opportunity to be alive, even to take this next breath, is actually unusual because this body is full of things, blood vessels and all kinds of stuff. People do have spontaneous strokes. They have heart attacks. People drop dead. Accidents happen. Tornadoes. We just are seeing weather events around the world that are kind of unprecedented. Again, the idea is that we don't take it for granted that we're here, that we're alive, that we are functioning. And not only that, we have sort of this unique situation. We're not in war right now. We are not homeless and begging for our next meal and starving, literally starving to death. We have it pretty good. We have it pretty good in terms of samsara, in terms of the world. Right now, where you sit, where I sit, got our health, at least for right now. We have shelter. We have food in our bellies. It's pretty good fortune. Because if you look at even the expanse of the universe, what are the odds to be incarnated at a time, at a place, on a planet where all these circumstances are here, are present for us? It should be humbling. We really should take this sort of a little bit seriously in the sense of, is it just the luck of the draw? I mean, that would be kind of strange. You know, Einstein said the universe or God doesn't roll dice, doesn't play dice, doesn't gamble. In other words, there are certain principles, and the principle of cause and effect and so on is very, very important to understand. Again, you should not take my word for any of this or the Buddha's word for any of this, but take these thoughts and turn them over in your own mind and see if it makes sense. And you should do that. Again, as I said last week, this is the tradition is to spend some time. We were not raised and brought up in a Buddhist culture. So these are not just givens, these sort of fundamental understandings. So I think even as Westerners, it's even more incumbent upon us to spend some quality time kind of making these thoughts our own. So we really do have some kind of deep conviction of this. If we get this, that this is a special opportunity and fleeting and rare, and so we say it's precious opportunity. If we really get that, then we can go further with this thinking because it comes to an end. The question is, what then? If our life just ends, there's no real reason to practice Dharma, maybe. Maybe there really isn't much reason, no purpose to it. We're going to die, everything's over. Maybe we should just grab as much wealth and happiness and fun, peak experiences as we can while we're alive. But if we start to go deeper, which is where all this is leading, and think about consciousness, our minds, and a relationship of our mind to our body, and also the relationship of our mind to who am I? This is actually the fundamental teaching of Buddha Dharma, is to break through to an experiential, true, insightful understanding of who am I at the deepest level. Am I a male or a female? Am I an American or from some other country? Is that who I really am? If I take that all apart, if I deconstruct all the conceptions of who and what I am, what's left? Can we get to the fundamentalist, basic understanding or experience of who am I? Kind of like, what is consciousness? This is the journey, actually, in the exploration. And through meditation and so on, we can develop intuitive, direct experience and insight to answer these most fundamentally important questions. Who am I? So what I was saying is, to come back, is if we're not our body, we could start to actually explore this notion that's very foreign to Westerners. And it's a loaded word. I hesitate to use it because it brings up a lot of stuff for people, because we're educated Westerners and we're sophisticated and we don't believe in superstition. So when I use a word like reincarnation or past and future lifetimes, that's a little tricky for many, maybe most of us that are Westerners, because we're sophisticated modern people. We know better than that. You can't prove it in a sense because, but if we look at deep examples, if we read and study about this, again, we could talk about this maybe in a little more depth at another time in the future, if people would like to hear about this a little more. But the idea is perhaps mind continues. The habit of mind, which is to experience, is not our body, because you can chop off your arm, you can chop off your legs, you don't lose a chunk of your consciousness. I think we can understand and establish the fact that we're not our bodies. So if we're not our bodies, what is mind? Now, again, this is where meditation really comes into play. But what enlightened beings and unenlightened beings even have experienced is what something that continues after death, after the physical body dies. Consciousness seems to continue, some awareness continues. There's a lot of evidence for this. There's also, of course, many stories of children, very young children, remembering past lives and so on and so forth. Some of this is debunked, some of it is not. It seems like there is enough evidence to keep this as an open question that we should not dismiss necessarily. But if we follow this logically and we do come to a intuitive understanding that lifetimes are continual, recycled in a sense, endless, continuing on, and the quality and nature of our experience is predicated on the quality of our thinking, the habits of our thinking, because really Buddha Dharma is about understanding how our habitual patterns keep us stuck and how it is possible to free ourselves from our habitual patterns of thinking and behavior, which leads to a sense of actual freedom. Because habits are shackles. Habits are our jailhouse. And to become free, which is the notion of enlightenment, to become a free individual, meaning free of your habits, free of your patterning, free of your upbringing, free of all that stuff, completely free. We can almost not even get a handle on what does it mean to be totally free from all that stuff. And yet that's the goal. That's where when we see an enlightened being, like His Holiness the Karmapa, or some of the other great beings, it's tremendously inspiring. Just unbelievable to see what the human potential actually could be, to be an unstuck being, an unstuck person, a mind that's completely free and spontaneous and unstuck. Wow. So if we're not this life, if we're not this gender, if we're not this nationality, this ethnicity, if we're not these things, then what are we? Fundamentally, we say we are free beings. It's just covered up and obscured by these habitual patternings, these compromises that we've bought into in this lifetime. Free of that, we're not a certain gender, a certain ethnicity, a certain, anything like that, cultural being. We're universal beings. So if we're not this in this form, the implications are then, if that continues and we do reincarnate, come back in another form, in a sense, embodied, but with consciousness, obviously does not remember this past life, as we don't remember our past lives as unenlightened beings. But the implication is that right now in this life, we suffer. We do not get everything or anything, the things we want. When we do get things we want, we tend to worry about losing them, or we do lose them. We lose our health. We lose our loved ones. These are the realities that, again, as Westerners, it's not so politically correct and so attractive to talk about suffering, because we're modern beings with all this great technology and the ability to sort of insulate ourselves from some of the harsh realities of the world, right? But when we fundamentally understand how suffering is, how profound it is, actually, everything's fine until something really goes wrong, and then things are not fine, and then we would do anything to get back to a state of fineness. But even losing your most beloved pet can be the most heart-wrenching, terrible thing that, it's almost unendurable, or a parent losing a child, or somebody losing their lover. I mean, these are things that are very powerfully painful. Or you get a diagnosis of cancer and we realize my time is limited. Any of these kinds of things, right? We get audited by the IRS. I mean, you name it. There's innumerable sources of real pain, real suffering, real frustration, real anxiety. And so it's not about, well, everything's good, so I sort of can just conveniently forget about the suffering and push it aside. And it's not really, it doesn't matter until it happens. I'll worry about it then. Actually, to be let's say a student of Dharma is to start to develop the skill set to become more proactive, meaning starting to think more about the future and consequences and how to have a better outcome. Can we have sustainable happiness? True happiness, true contentment. That's the idea. So that's why we should not squander this life, because it's so short and fleeting and impermanent. And right now, if we have, let's say, the good fortune to encounter Dharma and actually appreciate it and have an attractiveness towards it, obviously that must have some prior causes to give us those feelings towards authentic spiritual practice. Because somehow we fundamentally, deep down, I think we intuitively know, I need help. I need tools. I want to better myself. I want to improve my outcome. I want to reduce or eliminate my suffering. And that's really, really the whole key to basically the whole starting point of this path, is to develop proper motivation. And there's different motivations. There's everything I just described, which is sort of a very fundamental level of, I am acknowledging, I really get it, that I have a lot of suffering, maybe not in this moment, but potentially I have all the seeds of suffering in me, because I do have expectations, I do have attachments. So those are the seeds of suffering. So what can I do about it? It's that appreciation of this opportunity. That's all of this is the first contemplation of this precious human birth. So that's it. I was saying that the motivation is for most of us, at least starting out, is help. I want to get out of this suffering. A higher motivation is, and it can come later, it doesn't matter, you can't force these things. We have to respect our process. But another motivation is what we call Mahayana motivation, which is, oh, I'm not the only one in this predicament. I see suffering all around me. Everybody has the same exact issues and problems and seeds of their own suffering. From the homeless dog on the corner with fleas and so on, and is kicked and beaten and is just confused and sort of doesn't know what to do, to an elephant mother in the savannah of Africa who's standing over her dead baby that was just shot by poachers. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It's endless. And to be really in the Dharma Buddhist path is to be willing to be open, to be vulnerable, to be open, to acknowledge, to be aware on the biggest of levels, the biggest of stages, that this is the universal situation. And so I want to help them too, because my own happiness isn't quite good enough if everyone else, if all these other beings are also so much in trouble. That's a different motivation, but extremely important motivation, obviously. But we start with where we're at. So it's not about shoulds. It's about opening up. It's about increasing our awareness of the big picture. Like that.